Thank you so much, Sandy. Welcome everyone to our Neighborhood Voices webinar, brought to you today by Groundwork USA and our Technical Assistance Program. This program is supported by multi-year funding from the Environmental Protection Agency's Brownfield Program. My name is Kate O'Brien, and I'm Director of Capacity Building for Groundwork USA. I've been part of the Groundwork family since 2002. For 8 years, I was with Groundwork Lawrence, our affiliate trust in Lawrence, Massachusetts, where I worked on transforming brownfields into parks and other quality open spaces before I joined the national office in 2010. Now I work providing peer support and development of tools to practitioners of all kinds across the country doing this same kind of work. I'm joined today by my colleague, Ann Harrison.
Hi, folks. My name is Ann Harrison, and I am a youth development and creative community engagement professional. I'm based in Philadelphia, and I have over 15 years of work in the nonprofit sector, both in small and large organizations. My background is primarily in youth development and creative placemaking, as well as some local economic development projects. I'm really excited to join you today, and the goals of our workshop are to introduce you to a community engagement model designed by Groundwork's TA team, share some stories from the Neighborhood Voices Project in Portland, Maine, and invite your organization to learn more and cultivate ways to use this model in your own work through Groundwork's Technical Assistance Program. I'm going to hand it over to Kate to share a little bit more about the TA program, and then we'll get started.
So first, a bit about Groundwork USA. We're a national organization with local roots in 23 communities across the U.S. We're devoted to changing places and changing lives. Our mission is to bring about the sustained regeneration, improvement, and management of the physical environment by developing community-based partnerships that empower people, businesses, and organizations to promote environmental, economic, and social well-being. Our Technical Assistance Program is designed to provide peer support, tools and strategies and coaching for practitioners working to reclaim brownfields for community benefit. We work to ensure equitable development and environmental justice outcomes with those projects and programs. And our work takes shape in a variety of ways. This 5-year program is funded by EPA Brownfields, as mentioned previously, which expects that its grantees will work to expend grant dollars in ways that assure cleanup of brownfields and access to quality new spaces, public health, well-being, wealth building, and prosperity, particularly in environmental justice communities. Our Technical Assistance Program supports things like development and delivery of webinars like today's, other workshops, tools and white papers, and delivery of direct technical assistance. This program is intended to benefit any and all brownfield-affected communities across the United States and any entity that is involved or wishing to be in some sort of brownfield assessment, cleanup, or reuse effort, whether it's one that's governmental, quasi-governmental, or nonprofit-driven.
So this is Ann again, and I want to talk a little bit about community engagement and flesh out Neighborhood Voices as an overview a little bit. Authentic community engagement is really about building a foundation for long-term relationships. It's about bringing voices to the decision-making table. It's about an exchange of assets and resources. And we often ask a lot of constituents in order to participate in planning processes. We overlook that they might not be getting paid for their time, like many of the conveners or the nonprofit and government participants. We often plan meetings during the day or during school pickup times or dinner time. And we sometimes design meetings that are long and boring, and we always speak in acronyms. The project Neighborhood Voices was created to introduce a framework and a best practice for community engagement. But every good community engagement process involves being flexible and customizing to the needs of the community it aims to serve. So we're going to share with you a general framework that we call Neighborhood Voices. The Neighborhood Voices project consists of getting the thoughts and opinions of the neighborhood by hiring and paying a group of teens to interview community members, identify trends, and share their findings back. Ideally, the teens live in or go to school in the targeted neighborhood, and we at Groundwork TA work to work with a planning group to identify and pay the youth serving program to partner. The project partner ideally has an existing program in the targeted area with a group of older teens who meet regularly. We, in collaboration with the youth partner, train the teens to interview and gather feedback from the community members, their neighbors. We also train them in explaining the planning and development process. We train them in issues around environmental justice and brownfields. And the teams then work to gather the feedback from a variety of locations identified by the planning or stakeholder group. The teams then synthesize the information into a presentation, and they're looking for trends and opportunities and challenges based on the questionnaire provided by the planning group and with their edits. In collaboration with the youth serving partner, the teams work to build presentation skills to share their findings and make these recommendations. Ideally, the teams can present their findings to a group of key stakeholder or leaders in the decision-making process and neighborhood planning. Advisory groups, neighborhood groups are great places for the teams to do their presentations. Ideally, the leaders can then integrate the teams' findings and the feedback into their decision-making process. This is also a point at which a creative presentation can be added, or performing arts, or additional visuals. Neighborhood Voices provides a foundation to create a long-term relationship with the youth serving partner as well as the other stakeholders. The process brings together more voices to the decision-making table, especially for community members who cannot make it to planning meetings. Neighborhood Voices also provides the opportunity to get a sense of trends, like do we need more sidewalks or bike lanes? The opportunity builds community leaders as well as sets the stage for the teams to be hired for additional projects, which we did see in the past. It also switches up the stereotypes about teens, as well as the power dynamic about who really has the answers. So we divided Neighborhood Voices into four general phases. The first phase is about taking inventory. What do you want to do? Who are the people that you want to talk to? Who do you want to partner with? What's the budget? Phase 2 is about planning, details, timelines, agreements. How do you actually make it happen? Phase 3 is training, teaching, and transferring the knowledge. Phase 4 is the presentation and sharing the findings. So we piloted this project in Portland, Maine, and I'm going to hand it over to Kate to share a little bit more about that project. Kate?
The Greater Portland Council of Governments was our client that requested technical assistance through our website and submitted a short letter of interest that started a conversation. The Council of Governments is an EPA Brownfield area-wide planning grantee, and they submitted a direct technical assistance request that, as we understood it, would allow us to assist this grantee in designing and leading a community engagement process that would help the grantee reach beyond the community's familiar faces and would help engage often marginalized immigrant and refugee populations and communities of color, folks who lived in the area-wide planning focus area, those who are most directly impacted by the area's prevalent brownfield sites, and those who stand to gain the most from the wave of prosperity that would follow from brownfield cleanup and reuse investments, particularly in terms of access to jobs, wealth building, and overall health. And by the way, we thought that engaging local teens, particularly immigrants and young people of color who speak some of the many native languages in the neighborhood of the sought-after population, would be part of the process as well. So now we'll walk through the 4 phases as it unfolded in Portland. So we started with an inventory, and Ann mentioned this is a moment to check in about what are our assets, what are our priorities and challenges. We guided our client through a series of exploratory questions. What is it that you want to know? Who's at the table? And who should be there at the table? We also mentally prepared the client to ask and answer other questions about why this population. Can and will your resulting plan at the end of your process be able to respond to the information you receive from residents on the ground? And if not, then who in the community will? So then we got to work. We stopped to assess who was already in the room and who was around the table, particularly given the demographic makeup of the mayor-appointed advisory committee membership. We assessed and identified who was missing from that table and that committee. And that was informed by a review and comparison with the demographic data of this group and compared with census tract data from the area-wide planning focus area. In particular, we looked at numbers surrounding culture, gender, immigration status, and age. At the first advisory committee meeting, folks in the room looked around and quickly noted the identity of those that were in the room on the advisory committee were nearly all white Caucasians. While outside the four walls of that meeting room, right in that neighborhood, the population was about 60% people of color. Together, our group concluded that those missing identified as recent immigrants and refugees of color, Muslim peoples, English language learners, young people, and young families. We particularly worked thereafter to identify stakeholder groups. So we asked who has a vested interest in advancing prosperity amongst the populations who are often marginalized from wealth-building opportunities? Who could host and convene meetings? Who wants to be more involved in this work? Where do we want to interview people? Where can we meet folks where they are? And is there already an established relationship that we could leverage? We also took some time to identify a variety of potential youth program partners. So we asked the client, who has an ongoing program currently working with teens in the targeted community? Who has the desire and capacity to collaborate consistently? Do you already have a teen group that meets regularly? And can you create a project-based learning internship for a small group of students? In this particular case in Portland, the Council of Governments and the city prepared a joint area-wide planning proposal for a grant to the Environmental Protection Agency. And that grant, although it was a few years ago now, that proposal included in the planning process a former brownfield site whose stakeholder was a devoted user of that brownfield site, and it was a youth-serving organization. Despite good faith effort and intentions, discussion and details were not discussed, and the subsequent scoping of that project really didn't happen very well. And there were some sort of tender feelings about that in the community. So the client really understood and prioritized that a community engagement effort would benefit and allow for reparation of that relationship and to build a sustainable collaboration foundation between the client and that community-based organization. That really helped our client prioritize and select cultivating community as this organization to build a new way of working together. Now Ann is going to dive into some of the details that we worked through in Portland with the stakeholders.
All right, phase 2, planning. I love planning, and this is where you get into the nuts and bolts of how to make neighborhood voices work on the ground. This is where the budgets need to be negotiated and figured out. You want to look at projections, allocations, any restrictions or workarounds. How will the teen stipends be administered? Will there be administration fees for the youth serving organization or the coordination fees? Food, transportation. This is also where the language needs are going to come in, translation of documents if needed, as well as language priorities. So we knew in Portland that we needed students who could speak a variety of languages, and so targeting and making sure that we were hiring teens who were bilingual was really important. This is also about developing a plan for the scope and agreement with the stakeholders and the partners. Do you need an MOU or an agreement? Also, when you think about where the teens are going to do their interviews, where should they be doing their interviews? And is there going to be bathrooms available for them? Will there be a site leader that they can talk to if they run into any questions? And the locations for the interviews are great if they can be partners who have deep relationships from those that are missing from the decision-making table. This is also where you want to recruit and hire the teens, as well as develop key questions. So key questions are really important to this process, and we like to say there's 3 to 5 key questions. We made some mistakes early on in our Portland project by having too many questions, or questions that were asking the same thing in 2 or 3 different ways. And so when you think about the questions, you've got to have some specific idea of where you're going next. Do you want to know about end-use preferences? Is it a needs assessment? Do you want to better understand neighborhood priorities, or do you want to better understand the best way to have long-term engagement about meeting times and locations? We also found that the more that we edited the questions, the better the questions became. We eliminated some of the open-ended questions, and I think after doing the project, we probably would have edited down the questions even more. And the planning stage is a great time to get started with this. However, you can keep editing along the way. The other things that we wanted to think and talk about had to do with making sure that our teams were ready to do the interviewing. And so that takes us into phase 3, which is training and delivery. So Groundwork comes out and conducts the training, and we do a Brownfields 101 as well as environmental justice, and we train the teams to do the interviews and analyze the information. And we work with them to identify trends and really better understand what people are saying. One of the great things that happened in Portland was one of the students reported that when they were asking residents about, they would talk about gentrification as something that was bad, but when the folks who were interviewed that were working in the area, they saw gentrification as a good thing. And this was an interesting observation just to bring back to the advisory group. The students were really capable and excited to look at the trends and analyze the data. And I think we underestimated how excited they would be to look at it. A number of them talked about the first couple interviews being really hard and they were very shy, but by the end of the project, they really felt more outgoing and more confident, and they said they could walk up to anybody and talk to them. And for us, that was a really exciting moment when we think about the implementation of building relationships and bringing more voices to the table. So during this teach, train, and transfer knowledge part, we are talking about the training occurring, we're talking about the interviews, we are also looking at the data. And once the students have analyzed the data and looked at it, they start to move into the creating the presentation. At this point, we also brought in some presentation prep help in order to get them ready to deliver the content back to the advisory group. So I'm going to have Kate talk a little bit about the presentation.
On the screen now, you can see some of the teams that were presenting on their culminating moment. This was a really important moment. There was a lot of buildup, as you might imagine. There was a lot of dress rehearsals, a lot of running through comments and questions and thinking through sequencing. So we worked a lot to prepare the teams, not only to analyze the data, but to really personally reflect on what they were hearing out in the community on the street, and then translating that and sharing it in their own words in ways that were meaningful to them. A lot of it was confirming things that they had felt or experienced or heard in their families or amongst their friends in the neighborhood. So it was important for them to be able to share and own that information and give it back to the advisory committee. We offered a Presentations 101 coaching session with a young woman from the community who does presentation coaching with high school students. And we thought it was really important to not only convey public speaking basic skills, including reminders like maintaining eye contact with your audience, projecting your voice, creating note cards with bullet points, things that if you've done presentations before, you might take for granted or feel old hat. But for young people presenting in front of an audience of adults that don't necessarily look like them or speak the same way as them, that was a really important and pivotal moment. We supported the creation of a dynamic PowerPoint presentation with the teams. Contained information that was both visual and in print with handouts, and the teams helped do those slides with the support of their program coordinator. We also helped develop the advisory committee meeting agenda, which included the teams' presentation that evening of their data and findings. So we made sure, and we put a lot of thought into the timing and sequencing of that agenda for that particular evening. These meetings typically happen on a weeknight from 4 to 6 p.m., and we knew that a lot of the teams had mentors or parents or other family members who were excited to watch their presentation. So we made sure that their part of the agenda didn't happen before 5 p.m. so that those people who are at work were able to get off work and come and join the presentation and join the meeting. We also supported delivery of the presentation that evening. But before we even got to that moment, we worked with the project team with the data that we got and walk through some of the anticipated questions that would likely come from advisory committee members. So can you tell me a little bit more details about the data that we got? Or what kind of data do you think is missing? Or what more should be done? What more information should we gather? Those are the kinds of questions we wanted to be sure that the teams had heard about and were prepared to answer, or prepared to suggest that there was a moment for further investigation. We also helped to develop written summary of the process and findings for the advisory committee and the project team to support their group analysis of the findings and to promote discussion amongst them about how to integrate this data and this information into the area-wide planning tool, the document that came out at the end. So a little bit about the findings. The feedback that was gathered from the community, as you might not be surprised, involved almost nothing about the physical brownfield sites themselves, nor about details of the future buildings that would potentially be on those sites. Instead, the feedback that came from the community centered primarily on things that were programmatic or policy-oriented. People were talking about wanting access to constructive opportunities for neighborhood youth. People wanted places to play and gather as young families. Folks wanted to talk a lot about access to job training. They wanted assurance that they could have access to a job at a new business that might be opening in the area as new and redevelopment projects were happening. There was a lot of concern about gentrification and displacement. People wanted assurance that affordable quality housing would remain and that would be accessible to folks who lived in the community. And the advisory committee had to really wrestle with how to honor this feedback in a plan that had been mostly assumed to center on promoting development of bricks and mortar projects. And the community is actually, the advisory committee is still trying to figure this out, and they're not alone. Communities all across the country are struggling with this kind of issue. And I'll put a bookmark here for now, but I want to say that this is what we would characterize as implementation. So when you're coming out of a planning process, what are those things that you're doing that connect people to those places, that populate those vacant and contaminated sites in the meantime while development deals are happening or while it takes a while for financing? These are projects that take many, many years oftentimes to be realized. That's enough for now on that. It's for another time, but I think it's important to mention here.
So Kate and I are really excited about the Neighborhood Voices project, and we knew going in that we wanted to hit some specific outcomes, and I think we were pleased with both the ones that we knew we wanted as well as the unexpected outcomes. So Kate, will you tell us a little bit more about those outcomes?
Sure. So there are some things by design of the Neighborhood Voices project that we expected. For instance, we knew that the youth would gain skills and confidence in public speaking. We knew they'd gain a better understanding of their community. We knew they'd also be exposed to how decisions are made and come to a better understanding about how discussion and decisions are made in their community. We also intentionally built a program that would offer workplace skills, collaboration, customer service, job readiness. So they had to call them to work on time, for instance. They had a supervisor. They had to work with people who were different than them. On the other side of the coin, the advisory committee also we had expected outcomes for. They learned tools and best practices for effective meeting facilitation and development of agendas that were thoughtful for all parties involved. They learned how to develop partnerships with local community-based organizations. And they learned directly from residents about the best time and days of the week to have a meeting to promote greater participation of those sought-after populations in the advisory council meetings and in other planning processes. But I have to say that the coolest part of the project, as is with most of this kind of work, the unanticipated, the bonus outcomes. And there were a number of them that we were really pleased to see, and I think the client was pleased to see as well. The young people came away with a greater belief in their own contributions to their community through this project. They felt that they were a really important part of the decision-making process. They gained confidence and reported enjoying talking to their neighbors and people who were different from them, whether they were older or younger or outside of their own race or ethnicity. The advisory committee also were surprised to find that they thought the youth were important assets and contributors to their process. They came to realize the value of considering other voices in the decision-making process. They found within their group a will to make a bigger effort to include more people of color in their future meetings and to find ways to expand to other underrepresented groups in the future. And to just give a voice to a particular example, we had a young white male teenager who was part of the teen team who harbored some pretty strongly ingrained stereotypes about people of color. And he was very vocal in expressing those views at the outset and over a couple of different team engagements as the program got underway. This, of course, provided an uncomfortable but a teachable moment opportunity to foster dialogue amongst different kinds of people working on this team. And in fact, it promoted a conversation amongst young Muslim women of color and young white teenage males who typically might not talk about these kinds of uncomfortable issues. And by the end, this young man was the one on the team who volunteered first to ensure that his speaking points, what he shared back to the advisory committee, centered on sharing the concept of environmental justice and on the importance of bringing those populations to the planning table. But in fact, all the teams on the team reported that their confidence was built, particularly in speaking with others about uncomfortable things like race, gentrification, and cultural divisions.
So Kate and I are both very excited about the Neighborhood Voices project and see its ability to be beneficial in multiple communities. We like that it meets people where they are. We like that we have templates that we can share and give away that involve everything from budget templates to PowerPoint overviews of brownfields and environmental justice 101, as well as youth partnership interview questions, feedback interview templates, and data collection templates, as well as delivering training. It integrates into youth programming really easily, usually in a cohort of 6 to 8 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how much time that youth program is spending with their young people. It can be implemented even beyond teens. If you have a regular group of adults that are gathering, this can definitely be delivered by adults as well. It's easy to replicate once the training is delivered. So we found that in Portland, there was a desire for the government agency to get additional questions even beyond the project and to hire the teams to do that. It can also build a foundation for a long-term relationship between the planning group, government officials, community-based organizations, and the neighbors. And that's really what we aim for in good quality community engagement. It's about a long-term relationship and building experience after experience. So as we move on to the next area, we're going to take a number of questions. And thank you so much from folks who have already started populating the question tab. I'm going to hand it over to Kate to talk a little bit more about the Technical Assistance Program, but please type in your questions and we're going to start answering those in a few moments.
At this point, I hope you're chomping at the bit and you're really excited to submit a request for technical assistance. You can do that on our website by going to groundworkusa.org. There's a hot link there in our slides, but if you go to our homepage, there's a top navigation bar on the website, and towards the left you'll see Brownfield Technical Assistance tab. And if you get onto that page and scroll down about 2/3 of the way, you can submit a request for TA. And it's really a low threshold to start a conversation, so it's not a really thorough, extensive application process. We really feel it's best to just submit, 1 or 2 lines about the kinds of things that you're looking to do. You could just put, I want neighborhood voices in my community, and it really we would schedule a phone call and dig into some of the details that are going on in your community and how you see yourself getting assistance from us. You also have a couple opportunities to meet us in person. We'll be at Brownfield's 2017 conference happening in Pittsburgh at the end of this year. We'll also, over the summer, be at the American Community Gardening Association conference in Connecticut. And if you're an EPA area-wide planning grantee, you can meet us at the all-grantee meeting happening June 6th and 7th in Philadelphia. There are other opportunities as well. On the events page on our website, you can find other ways to connect with us in person, but you can always email as well to reach me and to reach Ann. We can connect and discuss and troubleshoot, and find ways to develop strategies for you to reach the folks that you want to talk to in your population. So we encourage you to use the chat box. Anne is managing. She's got thumbs up that there are questions coming in. So we will convey the questions verbally and then answer them all or try to get through all of them. Go ahead.
All right, there's some fantastic questions, and I am going to start with a question that came in a little bit earlier about what youth organizations are you drawing from and how many members to a team. It's a really great question. In Portland, we partnered with an organization that had a garden and cooking club/program for teens. And so they worked with the teens for 6 to 8 weeks, most heavily during the growing season around gardening. And then they did a community outreach cooking project where they were cooking meals and delivering the meals to seniors in a residential community. And they hadn't done a service learning project quite like Neighborhood Voices before, but because they were working with the youth regularly, they were really easy to tap to identify a few of the leaders who would like to do this project. So we ended up working with around 8 to 10 youth, and I would say that that is an ideal size. It's good to have 2 to 3 young people working together at a time and sending them out in those sort of teams of 2 to 3. More than 10 ends up being, you can do it, it's a little bit more challenging in terms of managing all of the students. So another question that's coming in, did we pay them? And the answer is absolutely. We definitely pay the students for their time and their relationships. Teenagers have great relationships with each other, and they also know a lot about the neighborhood that they live in. Or that they're going to school in. And so it's a really great opportunity to sort of reward them for those relationships that they've developed. The stipend also helps get them engaged as first-time employees and teaching them sort of beginner work skills. So the stipend offers this really great work experience to get them understanding some of the dynamics of working together, maybe with people that they're not friends with, as well as showing up to work on time and being accountable to something outside of their regular everyday life. I'm going to hand it to Kate to see if she has anything to add to that.
I don't have anything particular to add. I do think, and we have worked with a number of different communities, that this is important work worth paying teens for. Not only is it a teachable moment opportunity, but we find that when young people are honored for the work that they do in the community, it promotes a different way of doing business. So we're cultivating an expectation in the community that everyone is entitled to give voice to a process for a variety of worldviews and life experiences to inform particularly planning and policy making. And paying the teens provides some skin in the game, that they are accountable to a group, that they're doing work that is valuable to the community, and that is participating in a way that promotes outcomes that are relevant to all different kinds of people in a community, not just people who are typically used to navigating systems to get what they need.
All right, we have another question, and this is, I'm going to go back to talking a little bit about money. I'm glad that these conversations are coming up because this is the logistics to making stuff like this happen. So what were the youth paid exactly? We paid them the equivalent of a minimum wage, and we did pay them for their training and all the time that they committed to the project. It wasn't actually too much. The entire project is between $2,000 and $4,000, and that including compensating your youth program coordinator for their time as well, and the student stipends, transportation, any food that we needed, and the students. Off the top of my head, I would have to get back to you the number of exact hours, but they put in about 8 hours a week over the course of about 6 to 8 weeks. Depending on whether it was a training week or it was an interview week. And so that ebbed and flowed a little bit based on the needs of the site. It's a project that could be done for, if you have students for 4 hours a day for a shorter period of time, or if you have them for once or twice a week over a longer period of time. It can be adapted into those different environments. So Another question that has come up is, can you do this project with adults? And it's a great question, and I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but absolutely. The key is that you want the interviewers, the teens or the adults, to be able to meet with regularity. It's really important that they are a cohort that moves through the training together and they can lean on each other during interviews as well as during the presentation. It's hard with a drop-in program. So I think the most important thing here is that it is a consistent group of teens or a consistent group of adults. But either way, the neighborhood voices concept can absolutely be applied in different settings and with different interviewers.
Another question about, have you worked directly with local high schools, and what level of support were you given from the educational system? And in this particular project, when we supported the Council of Governments, we did not really interface much with the high school. Early in the process, we did consult a couple of guidance counselors at 2 of the 3 high schools in Portland, just to get their sense of the kinds of students that we were looking for and to kind of validate the places that we thought would be worth looking first, and thought that that was a really good way. I think in general, the educational system is not typically mobilized to partner with nonprofit organizations. It's tough to get into classrooms. It's tough to get permissions to get into classrooms and have teachers alter their schedules and lesson plans to include curriculum from outside. So this is something that we typically recommend as an after-school program, but certainly tapping teachers and tapping guidance counselors to recruit teens is an excellent place to start and consult. There's another question about, and I think I might let Ann answer this. Have you ever done this kind of project as incorporated into a school project?
All right, it's a great question. I think there's a couple of challenges. I think that you could definitely do it. I think working with a larger classroom size, it would depend on the teacher's interest and ability. There's definitely service learning opportunities within schools, and a classroom teacher would be interested in this. I think you could get the students motivated during the school day to do that. So yes, I think it's definitely possible. It would just take a little bit of finessing to adapt to the in-school day environment.
There's a couple questions that are clustered together. How is Neighborhood Voices typically funded, and is it usually a Groundwork local group that administers the framework? I will say, well, first of all, that this Neighborhood Voices, as we've conceived it and presented it today, it doesn't really have a typical funding source. I would say this is such a new thing that we are offering that there's no one way that we would suggest. I think what this provides is a moment to think creatively about what funding opportunities exist and what existing funds you might leverage, what organizations might have some funding. I often refer to, and if you've participated in any webinars of mine before, you'll hear about me talking the patchwork quilt of funding. So gathering little bits of resources together and pulling them together in creative ways. It often, money does bring people around a table in a different way, and that is certainly true for this kind of effort. Also, it's not typically a Groundwork local group that administers the framework. So we are, as supporters, as technical assistance providers, Groundwork USA's technical assistance team does support delivery of the framework, but who's actually implementing on the ground varies by community. So if Groundwork is in your community, it's possible you could partner with them. But that's not, obviously we're only in 23 communities, so there's other places too. But there's a lot of organizations that are similar to Groundwork that you could partner with.
There's also some opportunities to think about, I mean, one of the biggest challenges is a stipend, but it's not a huge sum of money. And there's a lot of programs that have like work-ready availability in the summertime or during the school year to access some of that stipend or payment for the teens. Groundwork, as the technical assistance program, provided the training for free, and so reaching out to Kate to find out more information about about Neighborhood Voices, and working with you to provide that or set you up for that would be something that you can do if you go back to slide 20. And we'll pull it up on the screen for you right now so that you can take a look at the different ways to connect. One of the next questions that I thought was also very interesting is, what is the best way or practice to get youth involved in the community that they live? And, you know, I love teenagers, and I think they are deeply involved in their community, but as adults, it's hard for us to see what that looks like and engage in their world. And, you know, there are some amazing youth professionals who are doing fantastic jobs in mentorship and building relationships with young people, and I think that that is where you start. You start with who has a great program, who's working with teenagers, and asking them if there's an opportunity to connect with the teenagers that they have and maybe recruit some more. In every community, there's an amazing person working with young people, and they really are the assets. It could be in the Boys and Girls Club or a rec center. It could be in the community garden, or it could be, you know, a chess club in the local high school. There are lots of opportunities to tap in. I think it's really word of mouth. Start asking at the school, start asking teenagers, start connecting to the relationships that you do have in the community that you're looking to serve, and asking who's doing great work, who's working with teens, and that would be a great place to start. Someone else just asked about, are the slides going to be available? And the answer is yes. We are happy to share these slides. And this is recorded. And I'm going to have Kate talk a little bit more about that.
So the webinar today will be recorded, and it'll be available, uploaded on our website on our technical assistance page and resources. So you can find it there. There's another question that came up about, for the Portland, Maine project, who coordinated Neighborhood Voices to work with the Council of Governments, and can you remind us of the project they were supporting? Absolutely. I think we had so many details jammed into just this 1 hour, we maybe skipped over some of that. So the Council of Governments sought out partnership with a youth-serving organization named Cultivating Community, and they're a nonprofit youth-serving organization focused on food security. So one of the former brownfield sites in the neighborhood supports an urban farm that provides programming in the community. And they were an excellent partner, and Anna Somo was their project coordinator, who was just fantastic. She's recruited many teams over many cohorts doing food security, food cultivation, neighborhood farm stands, really knowing and working directly with residents, building very deep relationships in the neighborhood. And Anna is just got really fantastic relationships with teens in the community, and so we knew that there was a really great opportunity to partner there. So they came around the table together, we walked through the details, we built out a program budget together, we accounted for the time that we thought it would take for Anna to do her work to recruit the teens and to manage them over the curriculum that we had proposed, and identified supply costs and things like that, and then worked with the client at Council of Governments to identify the budget lines and where they had things available to pay for this coordination work. So I wanted to, because we're just about out of time, I wanted to just clarify the application process and make sure that people understood how they could request our technical assistance. So if Neighborhood Voices is interesting to you, or if you're interested in some other aspect that might relate to brownfield work, the kinds of projects that we support, in this case in Portland, Maine, it was a brownfield area-wide planning project. So it was focused on an environmental justice neighborhood where there are a cluster of brownfields in Portland. And the neighborhood planning, the grant was a 2-year project that they worked on, the Council of Governments. And so this community engagement effort folded into and complemented that planning process that was happening. We support these kinds of projects and others all around the country. So providing a technical assistance request to us just really starts a conversation. So it may be that Neighborhood Voices is one aspect of a broader scope of work that we would support. Some other things that we could do are think about some strategies for pushing along a brownfield to park project that maybe people are interested in but not sure where to get started. Thinking about how to prepare for collaboration across communities and prepare for that first time a nonprofit knocks on the door of their local government to partner because they've never partnered together before. They don't know how to start a conversation. Or you're a local government person and you really want to connect with nonprofits, but you don't know which one, or how to choose the best location, or can I choose multiple locations, and how do we start that conversation? How do we plant seeds that can grow, and so that we can work and collaborate in different ways? So the TA request is very simple. You submit your name and your email address and just a brief summary, a few lines. That email comes directly to me through our website portal, and I will follow up. One of my colleagues will follow up with you. We will schedule a date and time for a 1-hour conference call where we would hear about your project, and if you have some written materials about it, we would love to study those beforehand so we have a good sense of kind of what's going on and what the opportunities might be. And then we would sort of brainstorm with you, like what kinds of things are you thinking about? Where do you see yourself having trouble, or where do you see an opportunity? Where do you see something exciting but you just don't know how to make the best of that opportunity? And oftentimes we find that because we're not sitting in the community with you, that we're thinking outside the box and we're asking questions that maybe just turn notions that you've got in your mind on their head and just help you look at things from a slightly different vantage point. So we brainstorm and think a little bit about what a scope could look like that fits for your community, but we work to customize and tailor things that we've developed in other places for your purposes. And are there any other questions?
I just wanted to answer a couple more of the questions that have come up. One of the questions asked about mapping technology and data collection, and if we had trained the teens in mobile data collection, and that's definitely a possibility. We did not do that for the Portland project for a number of reasons. I think making sure that you have working technology, and or if your budget can accommodate, ensuring that the mobile devices have everything on them. The teams don't always have those for themselves, so the organization would just need to think about what are the technology needs, and that really comes back to the budget. If you don't have a budget, we can also go back to analog and collect the information and work with the organization to collect that information as easily as possible. Identifying where to interview is another question that's come up. And this is one where you lean on a number of your stakeholder groups in the neighborhood. Now, these are folks that might not be able to make it to your meetings, but you know that they're doing great work in the neighborhood. And you ask them, where are people gathering? Is it pickup time at schools? Is it the soccer field on Saturdays? Is it the church on Sundays? Where is everyone? And where is a good time to have a conversation with folks? And you really lean on your neighborhood community partners to answer that question. Even if they can't come to your meeting, they can definitely provide some additional information on where to target your questions based on who is missing from your meetings.
There's another question that came in about can groups request assistance using neighborhood voices outside of brownfield projects? That's a really good question. So our work, our assignment from Environmental Protection Agency, our funding comes from EPA Brownfields program. The nexus that allows us to work with a community through a technical assistance engagement does require a brownfield nexus. So we would not be able to provide support or assistance to you that way, but we could also help you brainstorm and think about if there is a brownfield aspect to your work. That's something that we could help you think about. And maybe there are often brownfields in places that you don't even realize are there. So it's certainly worth a conversation.
Okay, the question about staff time, it's a really great one. How much staff time does this take? And I'm not going to lie to you, great projects take some time. The youth partner, and I think this is why paying or finding a way to pay your youth serving partner or your youth serving coordinator in some way is great. It does require a number of coordination hours, supervision hours. We provide the training and support to better understand the interview process and the feedback and analyzing, but that work in the community, making sure that the students are showing up on time, that they are where they need to be, and providing that support is the youth program partner. Or if it's a group of adults, it's a little bit easier because you're working with adults, but you still have a coordinator's time to make sure that everything is moving forward. There's also we like to get support for the presentations. I think that's an opportunity to partner with someone in the neighborhood who has some presentation 101 to share, or another mentor in the neighborhood who's working with students you could bring in. The planning team or the folks who are asking for the feedback or the advisory group, I think it's definitely a little bit of their time as well to make sure that they're staying in communication and building that foundation. Just like every good relationship, the hours and time put in at the beginning make working together much faster and much easier later. So that first project takes a little bit more time, but the second time that you do it and the third time that you do it within the same community becomes easier and easier, and it takes less time. So the heavy lifting is early, but the payoff is for years.
There's time for a couple more questions. There is a question about youth aspect being very important. Thank you. We agree. Youth involvement is paramount in creating a culture of engagement and citizen involvement across the country. This community has an underserved number of African American youth. However, per a recent study, they're not really engaged in any community development, and neither are their parents. How do we get them interested? It's interesting. We talked a lot about what kind of loading information, so foundational knowledge would be beneficial to the teens when we worked to develop this Neighborhood Voices curriculum. And we really felt strongly that the Brownfields 101 training was a way to normalize contamination in neighborhoods, to illustrate that there's a number of sites in the neighborhood, in the community, that might have some contamination issues, and that there are some reasons why developers or investors might steer clear of those sites. They're not the first places that developers pick typically to clean up and reuse in new ways, because they're complicated, they're unpredictable. There are some ways that we can minimize those complications and unpredictability, but it does require more investigative homework. Sometimes it does involve more money. But I think that the foundational information about Environmental Justice 101 we included intentionally because we wanted students to have an understanding that the occurrence of clusters of brownfield sites located in and near communities of color in particular, and in low-income neighborhoods in higher concentrations than in other neighborhoods of different backgrounds, of different populations and demographics, is not necessarily a mistake. It's not an aberration in one particular community, that this is a pattern we see across the country in communities large and communities small of all sizes. And so understanding that this is part of a larger pattern of the ways that our communities have developed and the ways that our neighborhoods are segregated or set up and invested in or not, is an important thing for young people to latch onto. And I think young people truly want to make a difference in their neighborhood but don't necessarily know how, or don't get those invitations often enough. So I think that going out to them and finding them is really important, meeting people where they are. So we structured this project to go out to people, meeting them on their doorstep, meeting them at places where they would frequent, and had, sort of high traffic areas. So, pickup time and after school programs, drop-in centers in the neighborhoods where young people of color would frequent and where parents would come and pick them up, or parents would come to see their performances. Finding ways to normalize information that typically gets filled with acronyms and just makes your kind of eyes glaze over very quickly if we can find a way to hook people into conversations about things that are typically mundane or overwhelming or boring or just alienating, I think is a way to really get people interested in making a difference.
So just to add on to what motivates young people, I think the teens definitely started because it was a job and they saw it as a job. And then it ended up being more valuable to them than just the money that they were receiving. One of the young people that we worked with talked about at the end of the project, he felt like he didn't realize how much he was capable of, both from the time and energy that he could spend kind of out of his house and away from his normal devices and social life, but also the way that he felt more valuable in the community. And I think that paying the students brings them in the door, and then we become a little more value added by helping them see how important they are and how much we value their thoughts and insights and work. So I am going to sign off. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was great, and I look forward to meeting many more of you in person.
Thanks a lot, everyone. We'd love to talk with you more. I'm sorry we did not get to all the questions today. If you typed them in, we would love to follow up with you. My email address here, I'll post that again, kate@groundworkusa.org. We'd love to have a conversation with you. If we would like sample budgets or things to start a conversation, absolutely would love to chat more with you and make sure you get the information you need. Look forward to seeing you again. Circle back to our website for upcoming webinars and other information and the post of a recording of this webinar so you could share that with others in your community. Thank you, everyone. Take care.